All right, so we are recording. So this is Skype session 6. So this is technically our last Skype session. Sometimes students will request another one within the last unit, but typically it's okay. Any questions I can usually address fine via email or our Q&A board for the unit, but if anyone wants another Skype to kind of go through things, then I'm definitely open to that. So this one, oh, and before I start, I just want to apologize for my lateness in grading some of your assignments. I'm so ashamed of myself. I'm usually right on the ball with grading things right after a unit ends. For whatever reason, life, many kids, all that stuff, I've gotten behind a bit, so I apologize for that, and I'm hoping to get it all caught up as soon as possible. But I will also extend that grace to you guys, and when you guys are late with something, I'm okay with that most of the time. So hopefully you can send that back to me a little bit in forgiveness. Okay, so having said that, let's get into Unit 6, which is kind of a heavy one. There's a lot of little details, a lot of things to get bogged down, I find, in this unit. It's a little bit of a crazy unit. It was put together because the reproductive system has a lot to do with the endocrine system, so they got mashed together. But we have had a little more time to do this one, which is nice. And so I'll give some review here, point out some of the, maybe more important or key pieces to keep in mind when you are studying. And then I have a ton of kind of review / practice questions at the end. So I think I have 20 or 21 review questions. So this could be a bit of a long Skype. I won't blame you if you have to leave. My throat might start to get hoarse too, so you can just say, I've got to go, and write a little message on the side there, and that's okay. Hopefully the recording will, work out fine and will be posted a little bit after anyway. Does anyone have any questions to get started about anything at all? If you do, go ahead and write it over there. Lisa, you get it? You're seeing the slides? Is that what it is? I'm glad. Pardon me, I have a bit of a cough that I was hoping would be gone by now, but okay, so this is a picture of, let me grab a pen here because I like to mark on my slides. This is sperm attempting to fertilize this human egg here. That's via electron scanning microscope, so pretty cool. So why hormones matter? So hormones pretty much control, along with your nervous system, are controlling a lot of processes and a lot of homeostasis that's happening in your body. Everything from this lady's doing some power pose in here, and this kind of stance can give off or it can actually decrease hormones that cause stress. Sometimes increase in weight can be caused by hormones. Different kind of sex hormones can cause gender to be changed in things like tadpoles, and that's adding a little bit of endocrine disruptor, I guess that one's talking about in your textbook. So endocrine disruptor is something that gets into your body and disturbs your hormone balances. So, and we are seeing this in waterways from pollution. So kind of the basis of how hormones are produced and get around your body. So we have all of these glands within us that we will talk about the major players individually, but those glands are made up of things called endocrine cells. So in this diagram, that's what you see here. And there are these little membrane enclosed sacs, or this process that happens within these endocrine cells that create different types of hormone. They are released into our blood vessels and carried throughout our body via our bloodstream. So different hormones are designed to bind with different receptors on cells. So when it gets to the target cell that has the proper receptor, that's when it can cause changes in a process to happen in our body. So hormones are released by the endocrine cell, travel via our blood vessels, and I wrote right here, they affect only cells with specific receptors. So they're always looking for that. That could be a question on a test, for example. All right, so there's kind of two ways that hormones can get inside those target cells. So if you remember if you took it recently, the first part of biology, you talked about cell membranes and how they're made up of a lipid bilayer. So because the outside of our cells are made of lipids, some hormones can pass through them easily and some can't. So lipid-soluble hormones, they do pass through our cell membranes, and so they actually work from inside the target cell. So an example of that is a steroid. Now, a water-soluble hormone is not going to be able to pass through that lipid bilayer of our cells, so it actually just attaches to a receptor on the outside, and then kind of a cascade of events happens within. So water-soluble works from the outside, lipid-soluble passes into the inside. So these diagrams, that's what it's talking about. So you don't have to worry so much about, signal transduction pathway and gene regulation and all of these kinds of things. Just remember that water-soluble is attaching to the outside, and then there's a process that happens within. And lipid-soluble can pass right through because this membrane is also made of lipids. All right, here's our major endocrine glands that we'll talk about. Hypothalamus, which is kind of your master control center, which we'll talk more about. Pituitary gland, which is kind of connected to your hypothalamus. Thyroid here in your neck. Parathyroid, which is actually 4 tinier glands that are embedded within the thyroid. We actually don't talk about those a whole lot anyway. They just have to do with regulation of calcium in your bloodstream. Adrenal glands, those are these little hats that sit on top of our kidneys. Pancreas, and then we have the gonads, so in the male, the testes, and the female, ovaries. So here's kind of a general overview to get straight. It's kind of helpful to get straight what each of these things do. And I would suggest when you're studying, actually write this out. Make a chart that says, okay, on this side I'm writing thyroid, and over here I know this has to do with mainly metabolism. So it has a lot to do with development and growth early on. For most of our lives, a lot of it has to do with metabolism. So how quickly we use up energy that we consume, quickly or slowly. Number 2, gonads. So those are producing our steroid sex hormones, so estrogen, progestin, testosterone, which we'll talk about more. Hypothalamus. Hello, Kim. I will write you down. Hypothalamus, so that's your master control center and then the pituitary is attached to it, so it's also kind of part of that master system. And those two together create a lot of hormones that are actually stimulating other hormones in the body. So it's directing other glands to do things a lot of times. Sorry. Now, adrenal glands, those are the kidney hats. And they have to do with our hormones for long and short-term stress. And pancreas, All has to do with our blood sugar levels or glucose levels in our blood. So make yourself a chart of that when you're studying. So hypothalamus, why is it the master control center? It is receiving a lot of information, some of it from our nervous system. For example, seeing something really scary. We talked about nerve response that has to do with that. So we see something, it stimulates our nervous system to tell our brain that we've seen something. And then actually part of that integration that happens within our brain is actually also going to tell our hypothalamus that we have seen something scary. And down the road, it can create hormones that stimulate the fight or flight response from our adrenal glands. So that hypothalamus is always receiving information about what's going on inside and outside of our body. So then, kind of beneath or attached to our hypothalamus is the pituitary gland. So the hypothalamus sends signals to it. It's kind of divided into two. So I wrote over here the posterior pituitary. So it's really just like a storage area. So the hypothalamus makes a couple or some of its own hormones. Antidiuretic hormone's one of them, and we talked about that one in our excretion unit. So that's the antidiuretic, which means reduces the amount you're going to void, the amount of water that's released when you pee. So that hypothalamus stores that in the posterior pituitary, and also oxytocin, which is kind of another name for it is like the cuddle chemical. It's like a feel-good hormone, and it also stimulates contractions in childbirth. So those two, ADH and oxytocin, are stored in the posterior pituitary. So posterior is all about just storing those hormones. Now the anterior pituitary, it actually makes a lot of its own hormones. So it's still receiving signals from the hypothalamus, but it's making its own. So human growth hormone, or HGH, and then a lot of other releasing type of hormones, ones that also stimulate the thyroid, for example, or different processes happening in the reproductive system. All right. This is just a shot of kind of where it's located. So this is a side view of the brain. Hypothalamus is this top piece, and then the pituitary kind of hangs down into this bone that's pretty much behind our nasal cavity and our eyes. Let me just catch up here in the book, make sure I don't miss anything for you. One kind of cool thing is endorphins. So those are studied a lot when it comes to pain reduction, and they're produced in the anterior pituitary. So it kind of gives positive feelings. And if you did the bonus point from the last unit, maybe you did meditation or something, or even exercise is another example, your body can release those endorphins, those that feel-good hormone. Here's a question. Which gland, and you can answer over on the side if you like, requires iodine to properly produce its hormones? Anybody know? Now in yes, that's right, thyroid. Around here in Canada, we don't generally have trouble getting iodine. We actually don't need a whole lot of it in our diet for it to be sufficient, but it's been added to our salt supply. So that's how the government or public health ended up reducing thyroid issues, by adding iodine to our salt. So this is an example of where the pituitary is going to release a hormone that's stimulating another gland. So our anterior pituitary create something called thyroid stimulating hormone. So a lot of these hormones that are produced by the anterior pituitary will have that stimulating word in it, because it's actually going to go and stimulate another gland, in this case it's the thyroid, to make its thyroid hormone, and this is where iodine is required. And then again, thyroid is mostly metabolic rate. So there, in your book, there's pretty good descriptions of hypo and hyperthyroidism. So those are two disorders that can happen. Hypo being not enough thyroid hormone is being produced, and hyper means too much thyroid hormone is being produced. And hypo is a pretty common, both are fairly easy to treat. Hypo is pretty common around here. And this is actually a negative feedback loop as well, if you notice. So the production of thyroid hormone, once it reaches a certain level, it actually loops back up to tell the anterior pituitary to stop producing so much thyroid stimulating hormone. So another example of negative feedback. Which gland makes two hormones that work in partnership to control blood glucose level? That's right, it's the pancreas. Now the pancreas can get a little bit confusing because of all this. Let me see if I have other slides here. I haven't coughed this much all day, by the way, so it's just convenient. All right, so this is kind of important to know, the way all of this works. It looks a little bit more confusing than it should be, maybe. So I recommend, your textbook does a good job of, you see how there's numbers here, like number 1. It will describe in the textbook what exactly is happening there. So I'll go through it for you. So homeostasis, so that's that kind of fairly, not much a little bit of fluctuation, but not much, stays within a fairly set or even amount. So in this case, it's our blood sugar level or blood glucose. So say we have a stimulus, so we're eating 3 or 4 very sugary popsicles in the middle of the summer, which is going to cause the amount of sugar or glucose in our bloodstream to rise. Once it's rising, our body recognizes this and thinks, okay, we better do something here to make sure it doesn't get too high. So the endocrine gland responsible is, and if you remember, pancreas is also part of the digestive system, but here we're just talking about its hormone functions. So blood sugar's getting too high, pancreas says, uh-oh, we better give off some insulin. So as blood sugar's rising, our body wants to make insulin to bring it back down. Now there's 2 ways it brings it back down. It tells our body's cells to take up glucose, so our cells bring it in out of our bloodstream. And also our liver stores it. So our liver will actually convert glucose into something called glycogen. So our cells take it up and our liver stores it. And because of that, our blood sugar comes back down and we are back to homeostasis. So on the other side, let's say we forgot to eat breakfast and you're starting to get a little bit hangry. Your body realizes that our blood sugar, our blood glucose level is getting a little bit low. So again, our pancreas detects that or is told that and releases something called glucagon. So these are the 2 hormones. Getting too high, insulin, getting too low, glucagon. So I think where some of the confusion can come here is glucagon is the hormone, and then our liver stores glucose as glycogen. So there's lots of glue words happening here. But insulin and glucagon are your two hormones. So blood sugar is going down, we miss breakfast. Pancreas releases glucagon. And how does it bring our blood sugar back up? Well, that glycogen that was stored in our liver gets re-released into our bloodstream as glucose, which brings our blood sugar level back up, and we are happy back in homeostasis. Any questions about that? Just looking at it can feel a little bit confusing, but if you compare it to your the notes in your textbook and go over it, I think Mastering Biology has some extra stuff in there too, so you should be okay. Alrighty. Diabetes, that's your major hormonal disease that is common with your pancreas. So in diabetes, your body's cells are, either your pancreas is not creating enough insulin to bring your blood sugar back down, which is often considered type 1 diabetes, and that's one that is most often diagnosed in children, versus type 2 diabetes, which is more a disorder of your cells not being able to take up the glucose. So your pancreas might be creating enough insulin, but your cells can't use it. So that is type 2. And it's mostly related to body weight, actually, like obesity. That's where a lot of type 2 diabetes is coming from, and not being active enough. There's a third type of diabetes, which is gestational diabetes, and that affects women during pregnancy. So sometimes even if they've never had any diabetic symptoms before. Signs and symptoms. So some people are this is for diabetes, very thirsty, urinating frequently, could be big fluctuations in weight, very tired, even some blurred vision, a lot of infections because high blood sugar puts a lot of stress on other areas of your body. Some later signs actually are going to be cuts and bruises slow to heal, tingling and numbness because it can cause nervous system damage. And again, trouble getting or maintaining an erection for males, and that also has to do with circulation and nervous system damage. Next question, which gland makes two hormones that work in partnership to enable the body to respond to stress? You are right, it is A, our adrenal glands. So epinephrine and norepinephrine. So these ones are not opposite. They kind of both do a lot of the same things. They're the fight or flight hormones. So they're the ones that when we get really scared, they're going to cause our heart rate to increase, or our lung capacity to increase, our breathing rate. Allows more oxygen to get to our muscles in case we have to run away. This kind of shows that pathway that's happening. There's a couple, so you don't have to get totally bogged down in this stuff, but there are different areas. There's an inner part and an outer part of our adrenal gland. The inner area, or the adrenal medulla, which is the middle part of the adrenal gland. It's more short-term stress response, and it happens very quickly with the help of our nervous system. So that's our, blood pressure, breathing rate, heart rate. And then the other piece to our stress response has to do with kind of more long-term stress, like if you're taking a lot of classes at once and you have all tests in the same week and it never seems to end, that kind of triggers the adrenal cortex over here, and they're more long-term stress, so they're called them corticosteroids, or having small children. Exactly. I have a few of those. So cortisol or corticosteroids. And that's where you can get into trouble of your immune system being suppressed a bit. So long-term stress can make you sick more often. It's a biological fact. So get to meditating with those small children. All right, which hormones are produced by the gonads? D, that's right, all of the above. So those are sex hormones, or sex steroids, sometimes they're called, estrogens and progestin. So all three, the androgens like testosterone, estrogen, and progestin, are all produced by both male and female gonads. However, estrogens and progestins are going to be in higher concentrations in women, and the androgens are going to be in a higher concentration in men generally. So estrogens, there's a lot of things that happen there as far as female reproduction. It's also responsible for women developing things like breasts and high or wider hips for bearing children. Progesterone or progestins, they have a big role in the menstrual cycle, and also in supporting an embryo during pregnancy, especially in the first part of pregnancy. Okay, androgens. And there's just a little fact there, like stimulates the development of the male reproductive system, and during the 7th week of gestation will stimulate the development of a male rather than a female. So there's so many little things that have to happen in those early weeks to determine, physical sex. Now this looks overwhelming, doesn't it? Let me make sure I'm catching up here. So I think we are starting to get into this is the beginning. Did I skip a slide? Beginning of our reproductive chapter anyway. So this is part of the reproductive chapter. That's where this image is from, but it's used here to kind of show the pathway for all of these sex hormones. So again, it's starting by our hypothalamus, that master gland up in your brain. It's stimulating the anterior pituitary, and it's making FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone, and LH, which is luteinizing hormone. So both of these hormones have huge impact in menstrual cycle, as well as development of the mature ovum or the egg. This is not good. My voice is already starting to get scratchy. Well, I guess I've been talking for a half hour. Makes sense. And then this is also showing, so this is the example of a menstrual cycle. So yes, it does. Yep. That's what it's showing right here, actually. FSH stimulating the follicle to grow, and then luteinizing hormone triggers ovulation. So especially anyone that's ever gone through, kind of extensive hormone treatment to help get pregnant, you're very familiar with all of these hormones. They are monitored very closely. Over here, where you have menstrual cycle happening, and again, estrogen plays a big role, progesterone, luteinizing hormone, everything plays a role in all of that to happen correctly. So this looks very confusing, but it's just showing how the hormones are working. I kind of like this chart, and it's in your textbook as well because it can be a good one to kind of use for studying. You don't have to worry about chemical class, don't worry about that. But knowing that the thyroid gland gives off thyroid hormone, what it does, so a lot of metabolic processes. And then it says regulated by TSH, so that's the thyroid stimulating hormone. It's a good one to study, like pancreas. Okay, pancreas gives out main ones, insulin and glucagon. And what do these two things do? One lowers blood glucose and one raises it. Adrenal glands and the process it goes through, and then gonads. I just kind of like this this chart for studying if that works for you. All right, so chapter 26, reproduction. Does anyone want to stop me for anything hormone related? And again, I have tons of questions that we'll do at the end too that may focus in on some things for you. Yes, you used to file blood reports. Nearly every blood test has. Yep, TSH, follicle-stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone. Yeah, it's testing out to make sure your anterior pituitary is working, because if it's not giving off those proper hormones, then all kinds of other systems in your body are out of whack. Good catch. All right, so the start of that reproduction chapter, it starts with kind of just a little go over of asexual reproduction. So that is reproducing without sex. So two, different creatures with different genetics don't have to come together. Sorry, I have a dog sneaking up here with my laptop. He might behave, he might not. So a lot of invertebrates, so smaller, less complex animals, reproduce asexually. So some examples are like budding. So, little pieces are outgrowing from the parent that eventually break off to form a new individual. Fission is another one. So that parent actually completely separates into two or more offspring. It can be very effective in, very quick increase in the amount of a population. So it can actually increase numbers exponentially very quickly, especially if it's difficult for them to be around other creatures. So you don't need to go find a mate to make more of your species. The one kind of drawback to it is that asexual reproduction, all the offspring are going to have the exact same genetic material. So it's essentially going to be the same creature. So if a disease comes along, nobody is going to be particularly suited to surviving it over other ones. So they could all be wiped out. So that's a big downfall for asexual reproduction, but it is a benefit in sexual reproduction. Some people are more apt to survive different illnesses and disease just because of their genetic difference from other people around them. Okay, your book does talk a little bit about hermaphroditic animals. It just means that they possess both male and female reproductive systems. All right, sexual reproduction. So in some species, each, so that's again hermaphrodite stuff, have both male and female. I don't know why it focuses on that on these slides. I don't. This is a kind of cool book if you're interested in human sexual development or different kind of gender or sex identity. Yes, that some can fertilize themselves, yep, if lacking a partner. So an interesting fact, in frogs, one or the female lays the eggs while the male is actually fertilizing them externally. Most terrestrial, so land-dwelling animals, require internal fertilization because there has to be the environment where male gametes can travel to the egg. So frogs don't have that issue because they're in water, but other terrestrial animals generally have internal fertilization. Some interesting facts. Why are testes outside the body? Does anybody know? Testes are inside scrotum, outside of the body. Sometimes it seems like a bad idea, but there's a reason. That's right. It's to keep cool. Yep. It's because inside the abdomen, that is correct, it's slightly too warm for optimal sperm production. And that's another reason why for better sperm counts, they encourage men to wear boxers rather than briefs, because briefs actually will hold them closer to the body again and be warmer. And number 8, what percentage of semen is sperm? No hot tubs. Not frequently anyway. 5%, that's right. Very small amount. Most of it is semen. All right, another kind of term going into the reproductive system. Gestation is another name for what? That's right, pregnancy. Good. All right, let me see where. Okay. So the textbook, I feel like, goes into a lot of detail on oogenesis and spermatogenesis. So both of those, it's just the creation of the egg and the sperm, and how genetically they are haploid that need to come together to make. So haploid means having half of the genetic material of the parent. Oh, sorry. Heather said in Mastering Development was one of the choices for gestation. This question back here, you mean? In your textbook, it has it as pregnancy. Let me think. Development was another choice for gestation. I guess that would be true. Like, development is happening throughout pregnancy. So I guess kind of in a different way it is. Yeah, I don't like trick questions. Okay, so oogenesis, that is creation of that half genetic material egg. And it actually starts during fetal development. So women as fetuses have eggs already there inside the ovaries. Most of them are not completely mature yet. They only mature once per month or so after puberty, and then the completion of a mature egg actually happens right after fertilization. So in contrast, spermatogenesis, which is creation of the sperm gamete or cell, it actually starts at puberty, and it's happening all the time. So whereas oogenesis is monthly, spermatogenesis is on the go all the time after puberty. This is kind of, not as important, but for every like one cell, one egg is created. For every one cell over here, 4 sperm are created. And creation of the sperm is completed before it leaves the testes. But it does take about 65 to 75 days start to finish to make a mature sperm cell. But again, it's happening, there's ones at different stages of development all the time, so that there's always sperm ready. So anatomy, I'm not going to tell you you have to memorize. You're not going to have to, it's multiple choice, so you're not going to be labeling a diagram. The basics might be a good idea, like where are male gametes made? You should probably know that's the testes, and it's inside the scrotum. Those things, the basics. I guess I pointed out the basics right over here. This again, you should maybe review it. Your textbook sometimes gets into a little bit much for detail. No, you don't have to know the function of each part. Know that the gametes, the sperms, are produced in the testes. Now there are lots of other things that happen, like where the semen is created, like seminal vesicle, and the prostate has to do with some of it, but we're not going to get into that much detail. All right? So fertilization, it's good to know that the sperm has this little pocket of enzymes in the front that it releases to help break down that outer membrane of the egg. And the egg also plays a big part in kind of welcoming this process as well. The plasma membranes of the two fuse, the genetic material is brought into the egg in order to create a genetic code that is complete. So when the two of them come together, it has the complete code. So within the female reproductive system, where does fertilization usually occur? So semen is deposited, sperm then meets egg. Where is sperm generally actually meeting the egg at? C, that's right, in the oviduct. Or fallopian tube is another word for it. So here's kind of the step-by-step of what's happening here. The ovary creates this little follicle that inside contains an egg. Then once per month, or once per 28 days, usually one egg, sometimes more, but usually one is released. If fertilization is going to happen, it generally happens here in the oviduct. Cells start dividing, things start happening. This one is zygote. I think I might have this on another slide. There's different names for the different stages. So as it's fertilized, it's considered a zygote. It kind of becomes this like empty ball of cells on the outside, and then it's a blastocyst. That's this one right here. And then the blastocyst will actually implant into the endometrium. So the inside of the uterus. So there's that blastocyst, the empty or the hollow ball of cells. And then it eventually will become this ball of cells that is now divided into 3 different layers. And those 3 different layers will go on to become everything needed for the human being. So there's the ectoderm. So that's going to be skin and nervous system generally. The mesoderm, organs like the heart and muscles. And then the endoderm, so that's digestive system, liver, pancreas. So those might be a good one to just kind of keep in mind. We're not going to worry too much about this. It's just kind of showing, this is before the egg even implants, 7 to 10 days after implantation, and it's around this 10-day mark that someone could get a positive, or sorry, no, this is just implantation, I'm sorry. 7 to 10 days after implantation, someone could get a positive pregnancy test because the hormones of pregnancy are starting to get going. And this one just shows day 31. So this is like microscopic though. And this little embryo could be a chicken for all we know. It looks very not human. Showing what things may look like around 5 weeks, 9 weeks, 14 weeks. It's looking a little more human at this point. And then your chapter pretty much ends on childbirth. And it also goes through the stages of pregnancy. So I would, read through some of the stages of pregnancy. It's good to know that, a lot, huge, crazy changes are happening in the first trimester. We start off with like just limb buds, and we even have something that resembles gills. And then going into the second trimester where we're more human looking, you don't have to remember how big things are, how big babies are, different stages, but they start to have a face with eyebrows and eyelashes in the second trimester. Arms, legs, fingers, all of that's developed. You can, if you're really keen, you can hear a heartbeat with a stethoscope at that point. Third trimester, babies are, starting to get ready for the outside world. Some can survive prematurely, pretty early these days. Size of lime. Yeah, if you've had an app regarding pregnancy, babies are always compared to sizes of fruit. And then at the end, so the 3 stages of childbirth. So dilation of the cervix, expulsion, which is actually the infant coming out, and then the 3rd stage is the placenta being delivered. 3 stages. And I just made a note down at the bottom, oxytocin, so that is one of the hormones made by the hypothalamus. So it's one of the rare instances of positive feedback, meaning contractions will only intensify until birth rather than decrease, because that would be, working against things if oxytocin got too much and then your body was like, oh yeah, I don't think I want to do this anymore, we're shutting down, and then labor would stop and you wouldn't get a baby. Questions? About anything? So there's a lot more in that chapter, but I've tried to point out some of the highlights. And it's 6:48, so we're getting up there in time. Let's do some questions. And if you have anything you want to ask, please just do. The early embryonic cells start to divide into 3 main layers. The ectoderm eventually develops into which one? The ectoderm. guys can go ahead and click right on the screen. Yep, 2 of you said nervous system and outer layer of skin. You are correct. I'm going to try to go through these a little bit quickly. Well, as quick as my computer allows it anyway. Hormones are usually transported through blank and only affect cells with blank. You guys are very smart. Blood vessels and specific receptors. I think someone else may have joined us that I missed. Who am I missing? I have Mary, Lisa, Samantha, Rivaldo, and Kim. Who am I missing? Heather. Heather, I'm missing you, Heather. I was just writing on my list. All right, next question. Most of you seem to say these questions and your reflections are useful. Missed the very beginning of the session. Yeah, I did review that, and it will be recorded. So yeah, just remember that water-soluble attaches to a receptor on the outside of the cell, whereas fat-soluble hormones actually work from within the cell. It can pass the cell membrane. Yep. True or false? Oh, here you go. Water-soluble hormones trigger changes in cells without entering the cell. Very good. It is true. Next question. True or false? Lipid-soluble hormones trigger changes in target cells by entering the cell. You're correct. It is true. Question 5. The blank acts as the main control center of the endocrine system. Yes, it's the hypothalamus. Good job. Question 6. The hypothalamus is attached to and sends messages directly to the It is the pituitary gland. Most of you were right. What was that, question 6? I don't remember. Yes, it was 6, 7. 2 hormones, insulin and blank, have opposite effects in the body. Very good. Glucagon. So insulin works to bring your blood sugar down, and glucagon works to bring your blood sugar up. Next question, 8. What is the main role of follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, in the body? You are very smart. Assists in development of human egg. Question 9. The gland most associated with hormones that affect metabolic rate is the thyroid. So thyroid hormone is most associated with metabolism. Good. 10. So I think I have 20 or 21. Which of the following lists possible symptoms of hypothyroidism? So I didn't list all these for you, but they are in your textbook and you can learn them right now. Which one's hypo, which is too little thyroid hormone, and which one is hyper, which is too much? You're correct. Weight gain, tiredness, slowed heart rate, intolerance to cold, and goiter. So goiter is actually a swelling of the thyroid hormone. So you can actually sometimes see like a lump in the neck almost, or you can feel it. Yeah, having thyroid disturbances is actually common after pregnancy. Yes, it does. Have you been on medication ever since? So the next question is, which of the following statements are false about glucose homeostasis? Yes. I always think hyper means like you're going really, really fast, so it's a lot. So I think, okay, that's too much. And then hypo is less. So which one of these statements would be false? So whenever I see a question like this one, I always look at each individual one and I think, okay, is this individual statement true or false? So rising glucose levels triggers release of insulin. So is that true? Declining levels of glucose, so lower glucose, triggers the release of glucagon. Or the pancreas stores glucose as glycogen. Here's all those glue things. We're a little bit split. We're undecided on this question. So it can be a little bit tricky. Let me show you the results here. So the false statement is the pancreas stores glucose as glycogen because it's actually the liver that stores glucose as glycogen. So the pancreas is creating your two hormones, but it's actually the liver that's storing glucose out of your bloodstream. So the correct answer was the third one. Does that make sense? Alrighty, next question. Which one are we on now? And you can change your answers after too, if you want. You can always click on a different answer. Question 12. Which of the following is associated with human growth? So I left these all as abbreviations. TSH would be thyroid stimulating hormone. HGH is human growth hormone. And you guys got it right. ADH is that antidiuretic hormone, and oxytocin. Oh, sometimes I see nurses write it as oxy, but I don't think it is actually ever abbreviated. Which gland is associated with stress hormones? So we have epinephrine, norepinephrine, cortisol, corticosteroids, which glands associated with all those guys? And you are correct, it's the adrenal gland. Or glands. Those are the ones that sit on our kidneys. All right, we're getting there. We're almost at an hour. This is always the longest Skype. Which sex hormone is key in determining sex of an embryo? Very good, androgens. Question 15. We're getting there, guys. Which part of the pituitary acts as a storage area, spelled incorrectly, for hormones created by the hypothalamus? Which part of the pituitary just stores the hormones created by the hypothalamus? Very good. It's the posterior pituitary. Question 16. True or false? Budding and fission are examples of asexual reproduction. It's true. Question 17. In males, gamete production occurs in the testes. Very good. Okay, question 18. The name for the early embryo that first divides into 3 layers is, so the 3-layered one. I love it when I see a big division in answers. Let me show you your answers, because that means I didn't explain something correctly, so I like to see that. So zygote is when it's first fertilized and begins to divide. Blastocyst is just a ball of cells that's hollow on the inside. And gastrula is actually the embryo that first has those 3 layers. So the correct answer is gastrula. So I'm thankful for this question, since I didn't explain well enough, I can tell. Question 19. True or false? Sperm are created immediately before ejaculation to preserve energy. The answer is false. They are always being produced, but they do take a period of time, like 65 days or so, to actually create one. But they're always ones ready to go. Yes, we don't want unenergetic ones. Okay, question 20. Human pregnancy is divided into trimesters. Which of the following is true about the second trimester? The embryo looks like it could be a chicken. The fetal lungs prepare for life on the inside or outside. The heartbeat can be heard via stethoscope by a keen ear. And by the way, your textbook says that that's true, but as a nurse, I have tried to listen to the heartbeat of all of my children with a stethoscope, and I'm unsuccessful. Or arms and legs are known as limb buds. So this is the second trimester. Yeah, that's helpful if the heart is near the outside. The correct answer here is actually that the heartbeat can be heard via stethoscope by a keen ear. This first answer is the first trimester. The second answer would be the third trimester. And the last would be the first trimester. So the only one for the second trimester here is the heartbeat being able to be heard. All right, is this the last one? Question 21. True or false? Nearly all terrestrial animals reproduce by internal fertilization. And the answer is true. Very good. So that was all of the review questions I had for you. And I can still talk. So it's a success. Now, as long as our recording works, we'll be good. Does anyone have any questions? Thank you for coming. Anybody that needs to go, please feel free. I like seeing all of you. I'm glad you came to participate in our last Skype session. And hanging out for an hour and 5 minutes is very admirable. Or you're snoozing, which is fine. You watch the recording later. Thank you. I am better actually. This is just a little bit of a